So with this, we have some motivation or we have some goal that we should be understanding OFDM. So before going into much details, let's first talk about that where it is used. So two hot technologies are 4G and 5G. It is also used in Wi-Fi and some other technologies like terrestrial digital TV system. It is also used in WiMAX and ADSL or VDSL broadband. Yeah, so again, the same points that it has better performance in frequency selective fitting, it has better spectral efficiency. It is also used to mitigate ISI. It has more flexibility in multiple access. So yes, to complete the picture, it is orthogonal frequency division multiplexing. So in this case, the signal bandwidth is divided into multiple subcarriers. We will see this in more detail. And all the subcarriers are orthogonal to each other. Yeah. So now the main point, that how OFDM overcomes frequency selective fading. Okay. So again, let's draw the same picture. So this is the channel, let's see. And I'll draw my signal like this. Okay. So in this case, I can clearly see that for this case, there will definitely be frequency selective. Okay. So what OFDM does, that it divides the signal bandwidth into multiple smaller chunks. Like, so let's say the signal bandwidth is BS. Okay. So let's say for OFDM, it divides the BS into n number of parts, like this. And all those parts are equal. All those chunks are equal. Okay. There, like this, there are n such parts. And obviously, this bandwidth or this bandwidth chunk is BS divided by n. Okay. But you may have one question, that why we are doing this. So let's zoom this part here. So in this case, the channel is something like this. Okay, channel is tapered, and the signal, my signal was like this. Okay, I'll write here as channel. I'll write this as my signal. But because BS by n is a very low value. Okay, so this is kind of infinitesimally small. So because this is a very low value, and when for this very low chunk of bandwidth, which is BS by n, we can assume this channel response to be flat. Did it digest to you, all of you? I'll again repeat. For this very smaller chunk of bandwidth, we can assume the channel response to be flat. For or smaller or very small value of BS by n. So what we are doing, that we are breaking the bigger bandwidth into very, very smaller chunks. That way, we are transforming the frequency selective fading into flat fading case. Okay, because when we said the channel's response is frequency selective, we specify it from some B1 to B2. That B1 to B2 is, let's say, BS. But if we are only talking of very smaller chunk of it, we can assume the channel response to be flat. Any doubts, questions on this?
But if signal bandwidth is greater than the channel bandwidth, in that case the problem still persists.
Okay, so you mean that okay, in that case there will be some other types of distortion. So you mean that if my signal is also on this part and channel is zero, did you meant that?
Yeah, in the last case we taken two scenario when channel bandwidth is greater than signal bandwidth and other is less than.
Hmm.
So currently in this scenario we have taken channel bandwidth within the single bandwidth within channel bandwidth only.
Ha.
But if it
Yeah.
is greater than that, then
Okay. Yes. So for that, by there is I'll try to put more some other parameters like we say that when we compare our signal bandwidth to channel bandwidth, we usually the channel bandwidth we meant as coherence bandwidth. Okay, so this is similar to channel bandwidth. Okay, and coherence bandwidth is the part of this channel for which the spectrum is flat. Okay, so this part is actually my coherence bandwidth. So to answer your question, this is actually a case where the signal bandwidth is greater than the coherence bandwidth. Okay, and I mentioned that earlier that coherence bandwidth is loosely, or I can say that channel bandwidth is represented by coherence bandwidth also. So this is the case where the signal bandwidth is actually greater than the channel bandwidth, because when we are thinking of that scenario where the signal is beyond these boundaries, so that doesn't make much sense because at those areas the channel bandwidth is going to zero. So I'm not sure whether that actually means something practically or not. But when we say that our signal bandwidth is more than channel bandwidth, we always refer by the term channel bandwidth. We usually mean the flat part, because in this case also the signal is experiencing frequency selective fading.
okay, yeah.
Yes, but you told that the channel response is only flat at the end side, outside of coherence bandwidth, but
No,
it doesn't.
outside of coherence bandwidth, the
Uh,
channel's response will not be flat. Coherence
okay,
bandwidth is that part of the bandwidth. Coherence bandwidth is that part of the bandwidth for which channel's response is flat.
yeah, but just now you told no for smaller values like in this OFDM, where we take n as large and our
Ah, okay.
this
So
BS,
for
yeah,
mhm.
BS,
I
yeah,
okay. Please go on. Please go on.
yeah, the BS by n becomes very low.
Yes.
So this you told that this is overcoming that frequency selective fading.
Hmm.
So by means you say that outside the coherence bandwidth, where the slope of the channel bandwidth is decreasing, you have mentioned that the response is flat for that value also, or
Yeah.
the whatever
Okay.
you have mentioned is
Yeah.
only
Let
for,
me.
yeah.
Yeah. Let me answer your question. So the question is that here we have in one case we have mentioned that the channel's response is tapering, but other case we are saying that we are assuming it as a flat. So what's the logic, right? So if we the answer is, if we are considering this channel for a larger amount of bandwidth, we cannot make an assumption that this taper or the slope is flat when we are talking of some larger value of the bandwidth. But when I am picking only a single chunk of this, okay, because the BS by N is only ranging from this point to this point, correct? Here I'm only talking of a single BS by N. So the single BS by N, I'll introduce one term here, that when we divided signal bandwidth into multiple chunks, that one chunk is known as subcarrier. Okay, I'll just introduce one term here. And because for one, the channel response across one subcarrier bandwidth can be assumed to be as flat. But when we are analyzing the channel bandwidth across multiple subcarriers or one part of the signal, that assumption is not valid. This assumption is valid only for one subcarrier bandwidth.
Pulkit, here one question from my side, this subcarrier and this channel bandwidth. So why in the case of this channel bandwidth, we don't get this flat curve, right? And for the subcarrier, we will get this flat curve where we are not getting a multipath fading. So why in a larger bandwidth, we have a problem of the more leakage as compared to the subcarrier?
No, it's not about the leakage.
Yeah, not leakage means this feeding.
Okay, let me, I tried to make my point, but let me think on more simpler way to explain that.
Because
Okay.
in for the smaller channel, we are getting the flat
Yeah.
curve, right? And
So-
for the bigger bandwidth, we are getting multipath fading, right? We will not get the flat curve.
Yes. So I'll try to cite another example that you maybe let's for now let's shift our focus to some other problem. Like when you might have done some mathematical problems where what we do that if we have been given a slope, okay, we can assume it to be containing multiple staircases like this, that if this is a slope, I can assume it to be something like this. I think it is used to solve some differential problems, some differentiation problem. Correct?
Yeah, I mean piecewise constant kind of thing. Right?
Correct. Yeah, I was looking for that term. So in piecewise, sorry, say again.
Piecewise constant.
Piecewise constant, yeah. Or I think other term is some piecewise approximation.
Yeah.
Okay, so in piecewise approximation or piecewise analysis, what we do that instead of having a linear line, we can assume that to be a staircase. So in this case, we are still reaching from point 0 to point A. Okay, but we can assume this as a for a particular chunk of, let's say this axis is time, let's assume. So for time t1 to t2, I can assume it not to be a slope or not to be a linear variation. I can assume it to be a straight line. And for the next chunk, let's say from t2 to t3, again it will be a straight line but with some different value. Okay, have all of you familiar with this concept?
Yeah.
Okay, so in this way we can actually simplify the analysis of our equations, of our calculations. So this is actually some kind of a trade-off that we are still getting the closer answer, but we are also simplifying the calculations. Okay, so this particular you can understand this particular with the help of this particular example, you can assume this over the channel's tapering response also, that over only a subcarrier bandwidth, I will assume my channel to be flat like this, but not over a larger bandwidth. It will be like this, that this is a flat response like this. But overall, if I look the picture, it will be linear variation, or it will be not, I'll not say linear variation, it could be anything, not flat. It will be a non-flat variation. Does it make it clear?
Yeah.
Okay, so that's why we
Also,
say
Also,
yes,
Pulkit, can we see mathematically like this, like when we actually have the frequency selective feeding where BS is greater than BC, okay, where we have where we are actually feeding the frequency selective feeding. Now here we have divided the BS by N. New BS is nothing but BS by N, my subcarrier frequency. So that will be always less than BC, right? I mean,
Yes,
correct.
you are right.
So I mean mathematically we can see, but here when we say this tapered part, right, where the the channel bandwidth is exceeding where a slope is something, distortion is there, right? So there this BS by N is almost like it will be negligible kind of thing impacting the subcarrier bandwidth. I mean BS
Yes.
by N in that part,
Yes.
right?
Yeah.
I mean it is impacting, but it is impacting in less, very less
Less.
compared to the initial scenario.
Yes. So yes, Vipul made a very good point. That in this case, when we are dividing the signal bandwidth into multiple subcarriers, so if we only look mathematically, so in that case, the BS by N is actually lesser than the channel bandwidth, and this is not frequency selective. So this is only the mathematical way of looking into this. But if we look practically or more on the intuition point of view, that how it is doing that part, then this particular piecewise approximation is the answer.
And Pulkit, here other in a real scenario when we have if we have 10 megahertz of the band, means whole channel bandwidth, and in 10 megahertz we have 50 PRV, we can say 50 this signals, right? This 50 subcarrier, right? So if one subcarrier is of 180 kilohertz, so when we are implementing this frequency selective scheduling, so two type things of measurement we are doing. One, overall interference level of the bandwidth, and secondly, each means subcarrier interference level. So we are giving the means allocating the UE those channel only which is having a very less interference level, or we can say the fading level. So that's why otherwise if we have a one single bandwidth in whole single bandwidth, how we can determine which is a good PR, means which is a good this subcarrier having a less interference and which is having a poor interference level. So this is the other case why we are dividing it.
Okay, your point is not exactly valid here, because whatever you mentioned, it is after is valid for a particular OFDM system. But what point I am trying to make here, that why we are dividing a signal into multiple subcarriers, or why actually how actually OFDM overcomes frequency selective fading. Your point is valid for some other scenarios, like when the OFDM is deployed in a particular system, then different subcarriers are actually experiencing different interference levels, which may be because of multiple factors. So your point is valid in that case.
Okay. Okay, Pulkit.
Okay. Any other questions, doubts here? Okay, not then I'll proceed. So yeah, we have understood that we have divided the signal bandwidth into multiple chunks, and those subcarriers will look something like this. Okay, and when we go into more details, we will get to know that these subcarriers are nothing but sync pulses, like this. Okay, so let's say this is my subcarrier 1. The next subcarrier will be like this. Okay, and the other subcarrier will be here. Okay, okay, yeah, you can do it like this. So this is, let's say, subcarrier 2. Okay, this is subcarrier 3. Okay, the numbering is not in order, but yeah, I think I made my point. Here, one important point is that because they are sync pulse, so whenever there is a peak of subcarrier 1, there will be zeros of other subcarriers or adjacent subcarriers. whenever there is a peak of subcarrier 2, there will be zeros of other subcarriers. Okay. And let's assume that the frequency difference or the subcarrier spacing between them is, let's say, delta f. Okay, so with this, I will try to make my another point. So remember these things, that the subcarrier spacing is delta f, and they are situated, or they are placed in frequency domain, one adjacent to each other. And when we said that in frequency division multiplexing, in FDM case, the two channels or two adjacent bands cannot overlap with each other, but in OFDM they can. So in OFDM, the subcarriers can overlap because the subcarriers are orthogonal. So what do we mean by subcarriers are orthogonal or they can overlap? So when we say that the subcarriers are orthogonal, or let's say I'll say that two signals x1, x2 are orthogonal to each other. So it means that their correlation x1 into x2, any, let's say when we're talking of talking this in time domain, so their correlation should be 0, or they are uncorrelated. They have to be uncorrelated. Okay, so let's put this point in our case. So let's say the first subcarrier here is sine 2 pi fct. Okay, the next subcarrier will be sine 2 pi fc plus delta f. Correct? Because we said that the subcarrier spacing is delta f. So if the first subcarrier is this, the next subcarrier will be separated by delta f. And let's calculate their correlation. So correlation will be the integration of this over one period. So what will that be? Sin A sin B is cos A plus B. So it will be 4 pi fct plus 2 pi delta ft cos A plus B plus cos A minus B. So cos A minus B will be 2 pi fct minus 2 pi fc plus delta ft. So it will be minus 2 pi delta ft. There will be 1 by 2 also, but okay. And to prove this, this has to be equals to 0. If this equation we can prove here LHS equals to RHS, I can confidently say that the subcarriers are orthogonal. All okay here? Okay. So because this is yes.
But you told that's a sinc function, right? But you are multiplying sine function.
So yes, good question. I was waiting for that. This is in frequency domain. Here I am talking in time domain. And time domain, it will be a rectangular pulse, but one rectangular pulse is made up of multiples. I can represent one rectangular pulse in terms of multiple sinusoidal signals.
Okay.
Right? From the Fourier series concept.
Okay.
Okay. So yeah, because if I again take a rectangular pulse and decompose that into multiple sinusoidal, this solution of this problem will become very complex. So to convey my point in an easy manner, I'll just take a single sinusoidal. Okay. Yeah, but it was a good question. Okay. So in that case, because here we are having 4 pi fct, and this fc is a carrier frequency here, because anyway we are first breaking the signal into multiple subcarrier and then sending it over a carrier frequency. So this fc is the carrier frequency. Okay. So this 2fc, this is nothing but 2 pi into 2fct. So in this case, we can make an assumption that 2fc is much greater than delta f. So I can neglect 2 pi delta ft in this term. Then I can write here it as simple 4 pi fct dt plus 0 to t, and yeah, cos minus theta is cos theta. So I can write here as 2 pi delta ft dt. Okay. integral of a sinusoid or cosine over one period is 0. So this term is 0. What about this? Integral of cosine is 1 upon, it will be 1 upon 2 pi delta f sine 2 pi delta f t 0 to t equals to 0. Any mistakes or any questions here? Okay. So how can I solve this? It will be, what was that? 1 upon 2 pi delta f. So this will be sine 2 pi delta f capital T minus sine 2 pi delta f 0. This has to be equals to 0. So this is what? The LHS will be 0. So the sine 0 is 0 anyway. LHS, okay, or anyway, we get this, correct? So this will be true when delta f into t is an integer. Okay, because we know that sine of 2 pi is 0. Sine of 2 pi is 0, sine of 4 pi is 0, sine of 6 pi is 0, and so on. So delta f into t should be an integer like plus minus 1, plus minus 2, and so on, plus minus 3, and so on. Okay, so this means that this delta f should be k upon t. Here t is the period of the sinusoid signal, or if I talk in terms of the rectangular function, it is the duration of the rect pulse. Okay, so when this is the actual time domain representation of a subcarrier, so this is 0 to t, and we know that if I decompose this into a Fourier series, the fundamental frequency will be 1 by t, and there will be harmonics at 2 by t, and so on. Okay, so I for this analysis I only took the fundamental part. Okay, so this what this equation tells me, that if this condition is satisfied, the subcarriers will be orthogonal. Okay, so now there is a condition that the OFDM subcarriers are orthogonal if their subcarrier spacing is satisfied by this equation, or the minimum subcarrier spacing is equals to 1 upon t. If this condition is satisfied, then we can say that the subcarriers, I am writing it as an abbreviation, SCs, are orthogonal. Fine. Any questions still here or on this point?
It should be exactly 1 by t, na, because if suppose my sinc function is not getting 0 at 1 by t, then it will move forward and it may interfere the other amplitude of other sinc function.
So then
So-
other sync shape will also be different.
Okay, but okay, you're saying that minimum it should be. So
Yeah. So
in
for
that
example,
case-
for 1 by t also they will be orthogonal. For 2 by t also they will be orthogonal.
okay, you're saying in the multiple of 1 by t.
Multiple of 1 by t. So so it could be 2 by t also. It could be.
Yeah, I got it.
Yeah. Awesome. Okay, so I'll proceed from here. Now comes a good point. To mitigate ISI. So I think I have not explained this point. So ISI is enter symbol interference. So now let's first talk about what is ISI. So I think I have already discussed about multipath fading. So in multipath fading, we mentioned that from Tx to Rx, there will be multiple copies of the same signal. So there will be one direct, there will be multiple reflected. Okay, this could be a building, it could be a vehicle, it could be anything. Okay, so ideally at the receiver, if this is the received signal, and if there is no multipath fading, the received signal will be AX, where A is some scaling. But when multipath fading is present, this will be A0X plus A1X plus A2X and so on. And this A0 will be having some magnitude and some phase also. And so on. Okay. Let's draw this to get more intuition. So now let's assume that I am transmitting rectangular pulses. So let's say this is bit 1. Let's say this is bit 2. Let's say this is bit 3 and so on. So I'm writing okay, B0, B1, B2 and so on. So this is my A0X or the direct path. Now let's draw it's another delayed copy, because there will be if this I'm getting at time 0, this I will be getting after some delay. Okay, so this is time domain. I mentioned it will be received with some delay, so whole signal will be shifted by some delay. So let's assume that the delay is this much. So I have to draw it something like this. Correct. This will be B0, this will be B1 and so on. Now let's draw one more. Okay. So it will be again be delayed from this. Yeah, this I cannot draw it to the right scale, but yeah, it will convey the idea. Okay, what we are actually seeing here. Can anyone got an intuition that how inter-symbol interference is happening here? If we look at this composite picture.
I mean, as the delay is increasing, the B0 symbol will interfere with B1, and it will be interfere with the next symbol like this.
Correct.
I mean, as the
Correct.
interference is increasing.
Yeah, you are right. So if I look in this time, so I can see that B1 is actually interfering with B0. B2, I am getting interference of B1 and so on. Okay, so here because one symbol is interfering with another symbol, so that's why it is known as inter-symbol interference. Okay, so this is a picture of inter-symbol interference. Any doubts here? Because of this delay. And yeah, I'll just put one more term that practically if we see that there will, if we look on the number of multipaths, there will be infinite multipaths, because, or not, I'll not say infinite, there will be high number of signals that will be coming in. But actually we limit these multipaths to some particular power level, that let's say if this AN XN goes beyond or goes below a particular power level, we will not consider this as a multipath, or we will discard anything beyond this point, anything which is coming after this. Okay, so let's assume that I had considered till AN XN, AN minus 1 X N minus 1. So the delay spread, there can be multiple definitions of delay spread. One definition is I take the max value. So I'll also put some numbers here, like it is coming at tau naught, it is coming at tau 1, and it is coming at tau n minus 1. So the max value will be tau n minus 1. So I will say that my delay spread is this much. Another one is RMS value. I think this is more commonly used. I'll take the RMS value of all these values, tau 1 square, tau 2 square divided by till tau n minus 1 square. Okay, so there are multiple definitions of delay spread, but yeah, on a concept level, or if you want to get a logical picture, it is the delay from which the multipaths are coming. Okay, yeah. So now come back to the original point.
Yeah,
I
so
think
just a one
yes,
thing. So basically,
yes.
you're saying with the power level, we will discard, like we will limit our multipath,
Hmm.
and after limiting, we will find the RMS and max, but whatever
Yes,
is remaining,
yes,
right?
yes, yes,
Okay,
yes.
okay.
Whatever is remaining means whatever we have received.
Yeah, whatever we have received after discarding the
Ah,
threshold till threshold,
yes,
whatever we received multipath, then we find the RMS and max using the remaining delays.
yes, yes, yes.
Okay.
So
But
actually,
Pulkit, I mean, for a given delay profile, right? When we consider a simple channel function as a delay profile, so let's say there are four components, one from line of sight and three from multiple paths. Okay,
mhm.
are coming. So basically, this profile we do we really discard with respect to power profile, or we assume that yeah, this RMS delay spread is nothing but it will weigh each and every delay, right? I mean, delay with respect to power profile.
Ah,
So it is something we can look as a weighing. If we say that tau 0 divided by n, tau 1 divided by n, it is weighing each and every component of the delay. So do we really discard those components and neglect that delay, or we consider those all the delays and do the RMS delay spread? I mean, this RMS is nothing
uh,
but it is nothing but weighing the higher power intensity with the like it will consider more component with the delay than compared to the less power profile. So basically, we in general we have the lower powers in the with the at the larger section of the power profile, right? So do we really discard it, or
okay.
something we consider it
Uh,
and
hmm,
use the
hmm.
RMS?
So,
Got your point.
Pulkit, here one other thing is, I think mainly we are discarding because system is unable to decode it, right?
Okay. So I'll take both of your questions. So by discarding, I meant that let's say I have to calculate the delay spread. So if I again look at my received signal, there will be so very high number of reflections that will come to the receiver. Okay, and it also depends on my receiver sensitivity, that till how much power level my receiver can actually tell me that okay, I am receiving some signal. Okay, so for example, the multipath will keep coming, and with more delay, their power, the incoming power will also be lesser. Why I'm saying that? Because if the delay is more, that means the signal has traveled in the channel to more amount of time or to more distance also. And
Yes,
the
attenuation will be high. Yes.
yeah, so the received power will also be, or the I can confidently say that the received power will be lesser for a signal which is coming with a larger delay. Okay, so but I cannot actually process all of them, because if I have to process all of them, I have to wait for a larger amount of time and my computational complexity will also be higher. So to limit that, to calculate the delay spread or to characterize delay spread or to characterize my channel, I will take only some finite number of samples. So by take the finite number of samples, I have to discard, or I should not consider anything which is coming beyond this. So by discarding, my meaning was that. And to another point, so I think it was asked by Nishan. So by discarding, I meant that we will only consider only till some finite number of samples, only to a particular specific power level. After that, we will not take the incoming signal to calculate our delay spread. Okay. Now another point that Vipul mentioned, that we will take the power level as weights. I think yes, that is also one definition of delay spread that instead of just directly doing tau naught square plus tau 1 square and so on, we actually multiplied the power as weights and then calculate the delay spread. But yes, I'm not very sure whether that is done in RMS delay spread or there is another definition of that, like some weighted RMS or something. Yes, that is also a valid definition of delay spread.
Yeah, I mean, we take this each and every, let's say A0, A1, and I mean AI, right? So all the
Yes.
powers we just define, let's say mod of
Yeah.
AI square, and
Yeah, got it.
we take those and we normalize that with respect to the total
The
power,
total power.
like this,
Yeah.
and then
We can do something
accordingly
like
we can
this.
do average delay. Yeah.
And into summation of mod AI square. Yeah,
Yes.
that is also a valid definition. But yeah, I think we say it as some weighted RMS or something.
Yeah, I mean, so this is nothing but a weight, right? When we divide this by the total power summation, okay, so each and every power, that's a weighted summation kind of thing.
Yes.
So Pulkit, my question was like, I mean, you already answered that, but let's say consider a given profile where I have four A0, A1, A2, A3, and A0 has the highest power, and as you said, right, as the delay will be increasing, the power profile will be decreasing. Like A1 will be lesser, A2 will be lesser, and then A3 will be lesser. So when you are saying that considering this section of power profiles, so in that case, let's say A3 has a very insignificant power. Okay, so it will be discarding that, or I mean, as you said, right, it will not be waiting for that much delay.
Yes.
Okay,
Yes.
the receiver. So it will neglect that, or how it will decide
So-
that.
So I think both points are valid. So actually, it depends on how we are characterizing it. But practically, what sounds more correct is that, because again, when I'm going to calculate this summation, I cannot wait till infinite amount of time. I have to limit that how many samples I can take here, right? So for that, there has to be some criteria that till how many samples I will go. So either I can define it in number of terms that I will take the first 10 incoming signal, or I can define like that only this particular power level I will take, otherwise I will take and I will go on to calculate the delay spread. So there has to be some criteria to limit the number of samples or number of signals in the summation.
Yeah, so maybe we'll be limiting this multipath components. How many multipath components we'll be receiving?
Yeah,
Right?
yeah. So that is, yeah, I said that it is up to the implementer, or
Okay.
it is up to the implementation. Both points can be true. Okay, so I think intersymbol interference is clear. Let's proceed. Yeah. So now comes that how OFDM mitigates this. So now comes a important point when we are learning OFDM is cyclic prefix. I think most of you are familiar, but yes, I'll try to put it in very simple words. And yes, you can please speak up if there is any question or doubt. So what is cyclic prefix? So we said that I am transmitting my signal something like this. So cyclic prefix in, let's take only this one. So in cyclic prefix, what we do, that we take some tail of the signal and put it in the beginning. Okay, so let's say that this is of duration t. This is of duration t, and I'm just denoting the tail as a. Okay, this is just some samples, and for understanding purpose, let's say this tail I name it as a. So I picked this tail and put it in the beginning. It will look something like this. And yes, obviously in this case, the symbol duration will increase. It will be elongated. But yeah, this is an overhead and it is acceptable. Okay, so how it will help me to mitigate? So this A is the cyclic prefix. I am prefixing something onto my signal. So Let me draw that here. So it will be like the first bit will be like this. The second bit, and yes, I will do it for every symbol. So okay, I'm interchanging the terms symbol and bit here, but it is applicable. Let's refer as we go further. Let's say it as a symbol. So for the next, for symbol number 1, let's call it as B. So again, I pick the tail, put it in the beginning. For the next one, it will be C. Okay, so this is my direct reception, or let's say A naught X. This is the first reception. Now another important point here, that what should be the length of it? Length of A, or I'll write as a length of cyclic prefix, or commonly known as CP. So the length of cyclic prefix depends on the delay spread. Okay, so that's where the characterizing delay spread comes helpful. So for simplicity, let's assume that it is equals to delay spread. Okay, so what does it mean here? It means that the next reflection will come after delay spread amount of time. So it will be like this. Understood? And yes, for simplicity, I'll just draw one reflection. And yeah, I have to again do this.
And it is the same, right? Coherent bandwidth, right, Pulkit?
No, coherent bandwidth is different. Don't confuse
Means,
it. Coherence bandwidth is different. Yeah, okay. Yes, sorry. Sorry. The delay spread and coherence bandwidth are related. So we can say that delay spread is equals to 1 upon coherence bandwidth. They are inversely proportional to each other.
Yeah. Means we can say delay is in time and coherent bandwidth in frequency, right?
Correct. You are right. Okay. So now let's come back here. So what we are seeing here. So still, when we look from ISI point of view, we see that symbol, or let's say symbol 0, symbol 0, symbol 1, symbol 2. So what is happening here? That symbol 1 is only interfering with the cyclic prefix part of symbol 2. Symbol 2 is only interfering with cyclic prefix part of symbol 1. This is this interference, and in this case the interference is only till here. Okay, so when I received them, because at the receiver I will get a summation of all of them. How will I get my signal? Or the received signal will look something like, so yeah, this is symbol 0, symbol 1, only this much part will be interfered. For symbol 2, the cyclic prefix will be interfered. So for every symbol, only the cyclic prefix will be interfered, or only the cyclic prefix will be affected because of the ISI. So what I will do at the receiver, I get the signal. Yeah, get the signal, remove cyclic prefix, and then go on to demodulate. So remove cyclic prefix means the signal will look as this: symbol 0, symbol 1, symbol 2, and so on. And this will be a clean signal. Okay, so this is how, with the help of cyclic prefix, we mitigate ISI.
Pulkit, how you can remove the cyclic prefix from the midway of a signal? Because
No.
basically what I'm Assuming
is-
is that removing the shaded part.
It is not midway. Actually, we at the receiver part, because receiver also know the length of cyclic prefix. Receiver also know that what is my symbol duration. So sometimes it processes symbol by symbol, or if it is not processing symbol by symbol also, so it knows the symbol length, it knows the cyclic prefix length. So, and yes, in this case, we are assuming that there are no time offset, or if there is any time offset, we have compensated for that. So we know these boundaries. The receiver knows these boundaries. So we are aware of these duration, and with the help of that, we know that where is the cyclic prefix located.
Okay, so then you will process some way, you will just remove that part.
Yes.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah, and yes, if there are some time offsets, that will obviously degrade the performance.
Okay, well,
Okay. Any questions till here? I will just stay here
Yeah,
for few
okay.
seconds.
Sometime there is a scenario where instead of cyclic prefix we do some zero padding kind of thing.
That's a good question actually. So let me pause it. So when we only looking from inter-symbol interference point of view, it is fine. But when we looking from a OFDM system level point of view, like OFDM transmitter, OFDM receiver, let's say OFDM transceiver, then that zero padding will, because the cyclic prefix will also give me another advantage. Like with the help of cyclic prefix, I convert the linear convolution into circular convolution. So I'll just not go into much detail of this question. I'll just say it out. Maybe if we have time, we can discuss that. So because how we characterize our system, I transmitted X, it passed through channel, I received Y. So in time domain, Y is equals to H convolution X, correct?
Yes.
Yeah, let me try to write here. So Y is equals to H convolution X. This is in time domain. So if cyclic prefix is added, in that case, this circular convolution this linear convolution can be converted into circular convolution. And yes, you can write the equations and then you can see, because this is linear convolution and this is circular convolution. Maybe if you are not understanding this, it is all okay, because it is not that straightforward to figure this out. But what is the advantage of this? Write it as with the help of CP, we can convert this. And if we take the Fourier transform of this, because this is now we are dealing in discrete signals, I can simply write it as H into X. Y is equals to H into X. Okay. And if I have to now think from the receiver point of view, now at the receiver, I can simply do Y upon H. So this is also known as one tap equalizer. It is all okay if others are not getting it, because this is not a very simple or very straightforward thing. Okay, because I think someone asked, so I am answering this, that only if cyclic prefix is appended, this is valid. If instead of cyclic prefix, we have appended zeros, then yes, ISI can be mitigated, but we cannot do one tap equalizer. We have to do some n tap equalizer. N tap equalizer, which is a complex process than one tap equalizer. Did I answer your question?
Yeah, but okay. So like I have solved the questions in cyclic prefix as well, where we let's say X is a signal of length 2, and let's say X is a signal of length 2 and H is a signal of length 5. Okay, 5 samples and 2 samples. Now I want to do cyclic prefix circular
but,
convolution of X with H, so I will just add the zero padding, right? So by that also by adding zero padding we can do the circular convolution, right?
you will not get this equation
Oh,
when we are
okay.
padding zeros.
Okay.
And yes, one more thing, I think so number of taps in your channel also tells you the delay spread, and that delay spread will determine the cyclic prefix length. So choose the length of H and X carefully when you are trying to solve for this. I can send you one link where this is solved. Maybe in the group. I will send.
Okay, okay. And also there is something we have postfix kind of thing where we can take the initial samples and then append it at the end, like here in cyclic we are doing in that. So I sometimes I didn't understand the difference between these two. Like cyclic prefix, I got the difference, but because it was the first concept which we get introduced in the OFDM. But when we do the initials and samples and append it in on the at the last, right, at the, so postfix kind of thing. So I mean
Isn't
the
it
difference
same?
between,
How are they different? Anyway, the beginning and end should be same. That's the concept.
okay.
So yeah, you can think about it. Okay, so in the interest of time, I'll proceed. Maybe we can take questions in the end if we have. Okay?
Sure.
But yeah, feel free to stop me if you have any doubts. Yeah. Okay. So till now we have seen that how the subcarriers is or how OFDM is dealing with frequency selective fitting, how OFDM adjacent subcarriers can overlap because they are orthogonal. So in that case, it is actually increasing the spectral efficiency. How OFDM is dealing with inter-symbol interference. And yeah, another point is more flexibility in multiple access. So in FDM, we saw that if a user is assigned one bandwidth and it is actually using it for a low data rate, it is actually not using the bandwidth to full extent. But in OFDM, because one subcarrier bandwidth is much lesser, so if the user is asking for low data rate application, we can assign it as a one subcarrier. Or let's say if it is downloading a video where it needs more bandwidth, more data rate, more bandwidth. So in that case, we can assign them multiple subcarriers. So we have more flexibility in multiple access, and also multiple subcarriers can be assigned to different users, and they can use it for downlink or uplink, any purpose. So this is on the flexibility part. Yeah, so now let's come to the point that how OFDM is implemented. And I write it as using IFFT and using FFT. So this is on the transmitter side, this is on the receiver side. So let's I'll try to explain this with the help of equations of IFFT. So how we wrote IFFT? So it was xn summation over k xk e to the power minus j 2 pi n k by n. Fine. So if you look this equation carefully, this equation is actually shifting my signal to a specific k value. So this is 0 to n minus 1.
E raised to plus j, right?
Yeah.
It's I.
Yes. This is plus. Thanks. Here n is the number of subcarriers. So if we look this in actually in the spectral domain, it is nothing but it is shifting my one signal to the subcarrier position. Here this is k 0, 1, 2 and so on, or 0 to n minus 1. You can start the number from here. Okay. And FFT is because FFT is just reverse of IFFT, so it is doing the opposite part. Now let's come to the disadvantages. So because nothing comes for free, if there are some advantages, there have to be some disadvantages, which we have to deal with. So it is prone to frequency errors. What do we mean by that? So we know that the subcarriers are like this. And when it is 0, the peak of other comes. So if there is any frequency error, what do we mean by frequency error? Frequency error means that this subcarrier can be shifted by some amount either to the left or to the right. So let's say it is shifted to the right. In that case, let's say because of frequency error, it is like this. It is like this. Okay. And the subcarriers are orthogonal only when zero of other comes when peak of other, the adjacent is coming. But because of frequency error, it may not be true. When it is its peak, the adjacent subcarrier is having some non-zero value. So this causes my demodulation to go wrong. Okay, or it leads to inter-carrier interference. It is just another type of interference, also known as ISM. Sorry, ICA, inter-carrier interference. So because of the frequency error, it leads to ICA. Now, what about PAPR? So PAPR is peak to average power ratio. Okay, so I will leave this as an exercise to all of you, that you start with the IFFT equation, calculate the peak power, from that calculate the average power of that from the IFFT equation. In that case, we can find that when n is going higher, that peak to average power ratio will also go higher. But what? Okay, we can actually calculate that PAPR is high, but what is the disadvantage of it? So disadvantage comes when we are actually operating a power amplifier, let's say. So how I draw an input power to output power profile of a power amplifier? So it looks something like this. It looks something like this. So it is linear to some extent, and after this is, let's say, power P0, power minus P. So to some power, it okay, actually instead of drawing negative power, I let P0, P1 to P2. So from P1 to P2, the output power is linear. After that, it is flat. So this flat is actually saturation. Okay, and the good power amplifier operation is expected when we are operating in this linear region. So you may have experienced that when on a speaker, let's consider a cheap speaker with costly ones like Sony or something. This is not very frequently observed, but if we, let's say, take a very cheap speaker, and if we put the volume to a very high volume, we sometimes listen some very distorted voice or distorted sound. So in that case, the speaker or the power amplifier might be coming to the saturation region. Okay, it is actually clipping the signal. Okay, so now how can I relate this with the PAPR value? So let's say I characterized my power amplifier so that this middle point is the average value, and so it can go, its peak value should go only till this point. So this is my input power. Only it should go only till this point. But if for a particular OFDM implementation, if PAPR is very high, in that case, the input power, which is the peak power here, can cross this boundaries. And if it crosses this boundaries, the PA or the power amplifier will go to saturation. And this is all again another kind of distortion or another kind of interference or something. Does it give you some logic, or does it give you some intuition that how PAPR is disadvantage to the system?